Good morning, everybody. We're ready to begin. So thank you very much for coming. I feel like we're on the highest floor, the last day, the earliest hour of this convention center. So I do appreciate the fact that I have more than 5 people here. Beat my expectations. My name is Dimitri Lylan. I work for Microsoft. I'm a product manager on the Visual Studio and Team Foundation server team. One of the things that I've been doing for many years, though, is working with XAML technologies. I started off in Silverlight. I did multiple projects there with Microsoft and our partners. I did WPF projects. And lastly, I've been doing Windows Phone and Windows Store applications. So I've been doing this for a very long time. And I thought I'd do a session, talk about WPF, talk to you guys about our ecosystem, and show you a bunch of cool demos. So a little bit about myself before I get started. I've been in software 14, 15 years now, 5 of that at Microsoft. And my career has basically been mostly in the Microsoft platform, except a little PHP here and there throughout the years. I really love what I do. I build software all the time, even though my new job has a lot of Excel and PowerPoint, but whose job doesn't, right? I still love to build Windows Phone applications, Windows Store, Azure at night. I really love to code. I'm a big gamer. Any Star Wars Old Republic fans here? Yeah, more than last time. I had only one guy. Yeah, so, lots of PC gaming whenever time allows. And I blog, I'm on Twitter, there's my email address. If anybody after the session has questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm fairly accessible. Today's agenda. We're going to focus today on sort of what is the ecosystem around desktop applications. We at Microsoft admittedly don't talk enough about this. There's quite a rich ecosystem for developers to take advantage of, to build applications that are modern, that are connected, that allow for all sorts of scenarios, whether that's a touch scenario or even tighter Windows 8 integration. I know we've talked a lot about Windows Store applications. I'm sure all of you, if you're into kind of desktop development, you've probably seen something around the Windows 8 application development, but today is all about WPF. It's a platform that we see is really fundamental and important to building desktop applications. Today's agenda, we're going to put WPF into perspective. I want to spend a little time there just so we're all on the same page. I want to talk to you about why I feel WPF is a great platform. I want to give you guys a little bit of Microsoft perspective around WPF as well. We're going to cover what was new in .NET and WPF 4.5 because I feel that's an important release. It happened less than a year ago, and there was a bunch of good features in there. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we're going to jump into the services world. So we're going to start from the bottom up of an application, and we're going to make believe we have an application, right? And how do we connect it to the kind of services that you might be asked to build for other devices and such. So we're going to spend some time in infrastructure there. Then we're going to talk about, all right, well, maybe we've connected our application. Now we want to make the application itself better. What kind of .NET enhancements can we take advantage of past 4.5? What has Microsoft released between 4.5 and today? Things that we've already announced and shipped and have somewhere available to you. So we'll spend some time in the framework world. And then we'll finally get to the user interface stack. We'll see how do we make this application, this WPF app, work better on Windows with touch? How do we integrate with touch keyboards? How do we integrate with touch itself? What can third-party vendors do for us? So we're going to spend some time there and close out the session. So WPF applications on Windows. Well, let's talk about what's true today. WPF has been around for a long time. So has WinForms. But you'd be maybe surprised, maybe not, that most people still have WinForm applications today. Most of our customers, the majority of apps out there are WinForm. I heard of a guy starting a WinForm app just recently at his organization. So WinForm, a technology we haven't done much with, I don't know how many years. I'm not even sure how many years ago WinForm was created. It's that long. So it's still a technology people use. WPF is much newer, and I feel fits in much better with the overall story of where we are, where we're going today. WPF is the best way to build desktop applications. I can't stress that enough. Now, I'm not saying that C++ isn't a good way to build desktop applications. By all means, if that's something you want to do, go do it. We fully are behind C++ at Build. You guys are going to hear a lot about C++. We're really committed, invested into that platform. But it's comparing apples to oranges. We're here to talk about the way a lot of people build applications at their workplace, for their business, and that's rapidly through managed languages for the .NET framework, and therefore we're going to spend today talking about WPF and not C++. But I don't want to set the expectation like Dimitri says WPF is the best, and therefore these other things are not good. I'm not talking about Windows Store, I'm not talking about C++, I'm not talking about web, I'm not talking about a lot of things, but today we have a specific focus in mind. First of all, WPF in 2013 is quite a mature platform, and I don't want to say that in a way that makes it seem old. I do want to say it in the sense that I have not seen much that you can't do with WPF. I've seen WPF apps burn DVDs, I've seen him host ActiveX controls and show video, I've seen him talk over the network to any kind of service you can think of. I've seen him store 500 megabytes in cache data that it's synced with, using sync framework with SQL Server. There's all sorts of things that it can do. Of course, WPF does require a pretty decent amount of hardware to run, and this was a problem at some point where people had really cheap PCs that didn't have graphics card, they could handle the rendering layer. Nowadays, that's much less of a problem. Most laptops, most slates, can pretty much run WPF within reason. So that's one thing to point out. And we fully support it. WPF is a Microsoft-supported platform. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. If you call the support number, you're going to get support for WPF. If there's a critical bug, Microsoft will look at it. We're still releasing hotfixes for WPF around security and critical customer issues. So there is investment to support this platform. That's not going anywhere. And also, it's pretty easy to deploy. It used to be, back in the old days when WPF first came out, that a WPF app at your user's workstation meant like 150 megabyte install or whatever it was of .NET. And then Microsoft made it better eventually. They released like a client profile version of .NET, which made the deployments smaller. And click once became something you could use to remotely deploy and maintain an application. And nowadays with .NET 4.5, it's not even a client profile. It's just .NET 4.5. It's used a web bootstrapper. You can figure out what's missing on your machine, install just what's required, and you're good to go. It really doesn't take much. Any modern network can install most WPF apps in seconds. It's using click once. It's just like a bar going across your screen. If anybody's seen Chrome uses click once to install itself, that's kind of funny to me. But hey, it's a good technology for doing installations on Windows. And since the beginning of 1 year ago, let's say 10 months ago or so, .NET 4.5 came out, which really, I think, brought the .NET framework in sync with where everything else is. So if you're building a lot of modern applications, like a Windows Store application, you're going to be using async. You're going to be using portable libraries. You're going to be using patterns and immutable collections, and you're going to be accessing data. All of that is great, but WPF can go beyond that. WPF can host entity framework. It can use reactive extensions and can support everything that .NET 4.5 brings to the table. And beyond that, because it's running on your desktop with full permissions and such, you have no restrictions. It's unlike a Windows Store app. It can talk to a local host, SQL Server. It can cache data offline in SQL Compact, etc. So lots of capabilities there. It just isn't available anywhere else for us. And this is the slide that I hope resonates the most with folks. I really am a big believer of skill sets, about investing into myself and for you guys to invest into the right path. And if you look at what the ecosystem is today, you'll find a ton of similarities, and that's a very good thing. You're going to see things like, well, I'm a desktop developer. I'm going to, let's say, use a managed language or C++ to build out an application, but let's say I'm a managed language developer, and I'm going to use XAML to build out the UI. I'm going to use the .NET framework, or an ASP.NET. I'm going to use the .NET framework on the server with C# or VB.NET. I'm going to build my UI in HTML and JavaScript, and the similarities continue on the right side with Windows Phone or Windows Store. Still C# and VB.NET, that skill set continues. You can still use XAML. Windows Store has WinJS, which has parallels to the web. So the parallels are everywhere, and if you are a managed language developer, and if you're a XAML and or HTML developer, you're in a good place today. Your career is in a good place. You can take your skills and build out applications. Not a lot of people can take their skill sets and one day be working on a web project, ASP.NET MVC, next day be working on Windows Phone, next day be working on desktop. Nothing's identical, but that's why we get paid a lot of money in most cases, right? We get paid because we have to adapt to the environment we're building on. We hopefully have some time to take a step back and learn the platform, learn some differences. But that's the reality we live in. We have to keep learning. So if you learn these skills, I think you're in a very good position, and your .NET and your managed language skills will take you pretty much anywhere in this ecosystem that you want to go. So let's look at .NET 4.5. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I do want to point out a couple of things. In .NET 4.5, Microsoft addressed, I think, some critical things on both sides of the fence, both .NET and WPF. On the .NET side, they introduced async. I think that was the best thing since sliced bread, or whatever the expression there is. Async just makes programming in today's world so much easier. You're not stuck, your application isn't stuck waiting for data to come back. Your application can do parallel link to do parallel activity, take advantage of all the processors. Lots of great advantages there. And the web bootstrapper, I would say, is the other biggest advantage, just the ability to say, hey, what's my machine missing to run this .NET 4.5 application? So that was huge. This happened 10 months ago in August. Then on the WPF side in 4.5, the first bullet over there is probably, again, one of the most important ones. We finally got the ability to access collections and non-UI threads, which means we can manipulate collections of data without having an application get stuck on us. And I missed that part. I stopped working on my last WPF app with 4.0, not for any other reason than my career kind of shifted and I became a different role at Microsoft. So even though I haven't done it, that's a great capability there. And improve support for weak reference to events. This is one thing about WPF. Whenever customers ask me, even today, what should we watch out for when we're building a WPF application, I tell them you should watch out to make sure, first of all, your performance is decent, the way you're building the app. The hardware can handle whatever you're trying to visualize, because you could go crazy, and that you're not leaking memory. And for that second one, making sure your events are not the cause of you leaking memory is a huge advantage in .NET 4.5, and therefore in WPF 4.5 as well. So between that release and the two sides of the fence, there's been a lot of great capability, and we're just building on top of it, and we're going to show you how in this presentation today. So now that we've tried to put WPF in perspective, and we've also talked about what .NET 4.5 does for us, let's look at an application from the ground up. Today, we have a lot of technologies that can provide data to the client or allow a client to send commands to the server. And most of this investment in new applications is going into the iPhone, Android, Windows Phone, Windows Store application that wants to connect out to the internet, get data, or send those commands. And a lot of data communication is done through OData. OData is a great standard way. It's a standard way to say to the server, here's some data that I want. And from this data, here's some query that I want to run on the data so that I don't get the whole data back, but a subset based on some condition. And it works across many partner products and Microsoft products. For example, if you look at our stack, SQL Server Reporting Services can generate OData. You can write WCF data services, and I'll show you that, to generate OData from anything using custom code. Telerik has OData feeds. WebSphere has OData feeds. There's open government initiatives that have OData. Lots of capabilities. But most of the time, I see customers using it either from reporting services or from their own custom development. And WPF can take advantage of OData. I'll show you how. HTTP services. This is any service that lives over a URI, one of the most popular ways today. In our stack, we build HTTP services, RESTful services, using Web API, so ASP.NET MVC Web API. And I'll show you how from a WPF app you can call out to Web API and pull data or send a command, etc. And SignalR. SignalR has become a very cool way to do a connection between a web browser and a server and do real-time communication. Originally, SignalR was created with the vision that you have a web page, and instead of doing kind of this AJAX pattern where it's calling back and forth, you create a connection and you communicate over that connection that's open. And I'll show you how to use the WPF app to also take advantage of this connection. And you can envision a scenario where you have web browsers talking to servers, and you also have the WPF app talking to the same endpoint. It's all about reusing code, reusing investments, or creating endpoints that aren't only for an application you might have today, right? Maybe today you have a WPF app that takes advantage of data or connectivity for like a chat room style event, but then you're being told, hey, you also need to build a web page on top of that. You also need to connect an iPhone to that application as well. So as you're being told these things, I want you to say, hey, I can still maintain a common code base. I can change the service and keep the new thing and WPF attached to the same endpoint. I never want you to think, oh, that must mean I have to rewrite everything. That's just not the case. So let's go into some demos. I've showed you enough slides. We're going to start with OData and go all the way through SignalR. So let me show you my project. Let's make sure Zoom is running. I built some sample projects, and I've kept them very simple with the intention of I want to show you sort of the fundamental basics. And if you guys actually want to learn it, you can, of course, go ahead and learn it. I hope to publish all of these samples for you as well, so that if somebody wants to take advantage of something you've seen today, or you're like, Dimitri showed something, I don't remember how, I think all this should be up pretty soon. It's just not up yet on our code sample site. So this sample right here uses WCF data to create an OData endpoint on a server. So I'm not taking advantage of any product's OData feed. I'm going to create my own data feed, a very, very simple one, be that. But I'm going to show you how to connect to the data feed and pull data out of it. In this application, I have a WCF data service right here, which exposes an employee entity from a database. That database has a couple of records, and we're going to connect over to it using our desktop application. So let me show you my Epic database. Yep, there it is. I'm very proud of that. And I insert just a couple of records into it, right there. And I'm using what's called the SQL Server Data Tools project to do this. SQL Server Data Tools is really cool. If you guys work with SQL Server, make sure you take a look. It allows you to connect up to a database, pull out its schema into source control, use the schema during debugging. It's very, very powerful. Will be on the scope of this presentation, but that's what I'm using in this project. And on the server, let's take a look at the server. I'm using Entity Framework. And I'm using code first to generate, first of all, an employee entity that maps 1-1 to my database, so I can populate the data. And then I map using Entity Framework. I make sure that there's some validation there, and I map it out of the database, from the table to my entity. And I expose it using this service. The service is using the V3 version of the OData protocol, and it's basically allowing anybody to read the employee table. Nothing very complicated. This is like the startup sample. If you were to go look up WCF data services and get a sample, they give you Northwind instead of my one table. But the same idea. They just let you see all the data in the database. And when you actually use the web browser to go to this URL, it will show you what's available on this service. In this case, it will show you that the service contains one table of employees. To connect to this WCF data service, the only thing that I've had to do was add a service reference. When I added a service reference to WCF data, the project was automatically configured correctly to connect, and it was configured correctly to connect using the client library. The client library was installed using NuGet. NuGet is a big part of today. You're going to see NuGet everywhere. It is a way to deliver assemblies into your projects for a particular purpose. So let's say you need a client to connect to OData. Well, NuGet has a package for that. And if there's any dependency in other packages, it'll chain them all up, install them into your project. It's a great way to get going very quickly with a third-party library or a Microsoft library. And Microsoft is publishing a lot of stuff for NuGet, like an official, not like an unsupported thing that we just kind of throw out there. Like product teams are now publishing things for NuGet, and we're updating them for the NuGet mechanism. It just makes rapid delivery of features to you guys, and that's how we released the client library. So if I go to manage NuGet packages, and I look at what's installed for this project, when I added that reference, it installed the WCF Data Services client library and a bunch of dependencies that it needed automatically. I didn't have to do anything. And when we publish an update, you'll be able to go into NuGet, go into the update section, find it, and just hit update, and the project will be updated, all the assemblies will be updated, and everything will be stored in source control by default. So it's a very, very convenient and nice way of keeping everything updated. And from a code perspective, there isn't even that much to show. First, we're going to create a sample data DB project data context. This is the reference, basically, that we have to the service. And then we're going to give this data context the URI of the service, which you can store in configuration. I've hard-coded it in my application. Once you get past the constructor here, your data context will be connected and initialized to pull data. And then when your window is loaded, we're going to look at that data context, and we're going to say, we want to pull every employee whose ID is greater than 0. Just to give you an idea, you can do any link query you wanted there against the service, and that link query will be converted to a query over the URI. So it's not going to process this on the client. It's actually going to tell the server, the client wants every employee with an ID greater than 0, or where the name is like something. There's a lot of capabilities there. It's SQL-ish, but not. OData is standard. You can look up everything that it's capable of doing, and then the client library pretty much exposes that in a .NET way to your application. And when we run, I'm going to put a breakpoint. We're just going to see the data come back pretty much instantly. Give it a second. So once it built, which was the longest part of this, we're able to very quickly connect, filter out, create the query. And if you look at this entity right here, let me zoom in for you. It's probably not going to like the zooming. I apologize. I don't know if blowing it up will help here. Yeah, it's not going to help much. But basically, we are creating a query using this link statement. And what I can do is I can copy that out to Notepad so we can all see it. So here's the OData command that it's doing. It's calling the service, and it's telling the service that it wants to make a filter based on the ID greater than 0. So the client library will handle the OData parts for you. You don't have to worry about knowing how to do OData per se, just to get started. Very powerful mechanism to get data. Once this query is executed, we're going to get our 3 employees back because everybody's ID is greater than 0. And in a very basic way, we're going to output the data. So not a lot of magic, but a lot of potential capability there. Next, we're going to look at an HTTP service. This is a very popular way to create services that could return data, but also just do command-like operations against the server. You can imagine an HTTP service that, instead of pulling or pushing data, can turn the lights on and off. Send the command lights on, lights off, or something to the server, and the server executes those commands. Or maybe a robot that walks around. I've seen some funny demos. People get creative. But for our sake, it's going to be about data in and data out. So here I have a web API project. And this is built using ASP.NET MVC4, stuff that's in production today. And I won't be able to teach you in a few seconds what API is or what MVC is, but I do want to show you some code. This is a controller, an API controller. MVC allows you to create a controller that then, based on URI, takes in commands, and it uses standard HTTP. Microsoft didn't reinvent the wheel here at all. We're basically using standard HTTP to either get data with a more query-like parameter, so like get products by a specific ID, or get products by a category, or post a product. In other words, take a product and then do something with the data sent back from the client. And it does all of that using URL strings. You will see commands that look, I'll show you an example. So if, let's say we're if it's www.microsoft.com/data/products, and if you were to do this, you could potentially get a list of products back, or if you do /1 as a GET request, it could return the product with the ID 1. So there's a lot of URL-based capabilities. It makes it easy to debug. You fiddler this, you can see what your client is doing. And this is the approach that a lot of folks are taking with something like an iPhone app or an Android app all over the place, right? They're building these HTTP services. There's no reason why a WPF app can't take advantage of them. Let's take a look how. So there's our desktop project. And desktop project, I have a little bit fancier collection, but basically it's a collection, observable collection of product. And I'm going to get a list of products back or push a list of products up to the server. In my main window, I use the HTTP client library, the standard HTTP client library in WPF. and I'll create a connection with the request for JSON data to the server, because we're going to use JSON to push data in and out of the server. And then we're going to get products, and we're going to get them asynchronously, so our application isn't going to freeze even if this takes some time. We're going to look at the API for products, and if this connection works, we're going to get our data back. We also have the ability to post products, and the way we do it is there's a method for posting products as JSON. It does the serialization for you over the web. Again, you just point to the right controller, and the controller knows if you're asking to get data or if you're asking to push data. And it does all of this using a client-side library in WPF, which is once again delivered to you guys through NuGet, and Microsoft updates these things all the time. So we've built what's called the Microsoft HTTP Client Library, and it has some dependencies, and those are again installed for you automatically when you add the NuGet package. So in this particular case, we're not adding a reference. We're adding a NuGet package to our application. Once the NuGet package is installed, we're saying, here's a URL, go execute that URL. Once the JSON comes back, we process the JSON. Then we want to post back, all right, convert an object in our application, an entity, to JSON, and send it over the URI to the server. That's all we're doing. So there's no traditional kind of service references like we showed with WCF data. So I want to show you guys what that looks like from a code perspective. Let's put some breakpoints. So our application is going to run, and it's going to initialize the connection. Then we're going to say get product in our application. It's going to go out to the server, and if there is no fault, which there wasn't in this case, it's going to execute a query. And if you look at, again, I'm going to have to pull this out. If you look at the result, yeah, it's not going to give me an easy way to do that. Oh, it's all right. So basically, we've sent a URL request, and we've set the headers to say JSON. You can also use AtomPub. And we've requested to use a GET over the URI to the localhost API products controller. And that's how it knows to return data for us. It's going to read the response. And the result set will be mapping of the JSON to our objects, because the JSON and our entities map one-to-one. And there you go, the data is being returned from the server quite seamlessly. There's no manual serialization. You're not like taking on the right side with strings, ID, name, whatever. You're not doing that. You're just saying, here's a JSON payload, map it to my entity object. I've made it one-to-one. I've looked at the JSON. I know what a product looks like. It has these fields. Once you establish that in your object, which I have here, so if I go to product, my product matches what the JSON is going to be returning, these three fields, and it matches their data type. Once I do that, I'm good to go. It will map it for me, and our client will return a bunch of data. And the same way, I can post data. So I can create an entity from scratch, and I can give it a price, a category. And once I hit post, it's going to go out there, and it's going to post this product object, which has everything I just typed into it, out to the server. And the server is going to give me a response saying either everything worked or it failed. So you have a lot of capability to catch errors here and such. And you're good to go. And the data has been posted to the server. So this could have been a service you built for that iPad, for that Windows Store application. It doesn't matter. You could host this on premises. You could put it in Azure. Azure is just a place to host at this point. It really doesn't matter. And you're able to reuse your logic from WPF and other clients as well. Next was what I think the cooler demo, SignalR. I'm curious, does anybody use SignalR for anything here? Not a single hand. Okay, that's fair. SignalR is fairly new. I'll show you guys what it is. If you're doing web development, I strongly recommend you take a look at it. So if you go to SignalR, this is an open source GitHub project. It was invented by a person at Microsoft. There was a session here on SignalR that was quite popular. And SignalR does two big things from my perspective for web developers or desktop developers in the same way. And I guess more for web developers. Let's start there. So if you're a web developer, you want to create communication between the client and the server. And you want to keep that communication constant. All right, how are you going to do that? Well, SignalR is going to do it for you. SignalR, you're going to tell it what you want to connect to, what server backend. SignalR will figure out what browser capabilities you have and fall back to older capabilities all the way up to WebSockets. So it figures out what your browser can do and uses that, what it can do to communicate out to the server. So SignalR does quite a bit for you on the server side. But because it creates a tunnel in such a standard way, I'll show you how we can attach that tunnel and push data back and forth from our client. I'm just going to run the app first because I think it's a good demo. So here we have a web server that's running a SignalR server. And we are showing you how inside of the WPF app I'm moving something. It's talking to the server. This client count really should be 2. It's off by 1. It just hit me, for the first time. You can look at something and be blind for quite a bit of time. But here we're going to start another browser instance, and there it actually catches up to the proper count. And now let's actually do that. Oops. And now we have three clients talking to each other. So you can imagine the power of this capability, this real-time communication. This is based on an open web standards, and I'll show you how the code facilitates the communication with SignalR, even from WPF. Before I look at WPF, I want to show you the server side very briefly, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. On the server side, there's a little bit of jQuery, because this is a very basic example. The jQuery creates a hub for connectivity. This is from a client library that we built for servers. We've built and there's a bunch of NuGet packages that you put together that say, I want to use SignalR on the server. Let's create the server objects for it. Take a little bit of jQuery, allows the jQuery to have the web page talk to SignalR. But really on the back end, it's a C# code. So our C# code here creates what's called a SignalR hub. It responds to move shape URI commands, and that's how it initializes the connection. And this keeps all the clients in sync. And you can have logic in here that does authentication. You can have logic in here that detects timeouts. If you guys have seen Team Room in some of the other demos, Team Room uses SignalR to do the communication. So SignalR is here to stay. It's quite popular from Microsoft perspective and customers as well. So the server has the ability to do something on connect, on disconnect. In this case, we're just increasing or decreasing the number of clients connected, and we have a bug, as you saw in there. So that's my fault. And then we have a JavaScript file that allows a web page to create a connection. So this is the jQuery that lets that web page, allows me to move the object or show you how the object is moving. And then on the client side, we have, let's show you the NuGet packages first. We have 2 NuGet packages. The communication uses JSON, so that's installed as a dependency. But this is something we created, we maintain. When we update it, you'll get an updated version for NuGet. So it's very easy to keep updated. This allows any client, any .NET client. This could be a server client, a WinForm client, a WPF client to connect out to SignalR. And in our code, in the main window, we basically create a client. See what that is? Here it is. So we create a client, and then we tell the client, unloaded, we're going to connect, and on closing, we're going to close the connection so the connections are cleaned up properly. When the window is loaded, we're going to start a connection. And anytime the shape has a draggable event, we're going to tell the client that the shape moved and tell it its new location. If the server detects that a shape was moved, it's going to tell us, so that way we can update our UI. So if I move it in the browser, this code will update the UI side of things. It's really not a lot of code to do what I just showed you. And most of the magic happens in this client library here. The client library uses that NuGet SDK to create a hub connection. I give it the URL. I tell it to connect to move shape. On the server, you probably notice that attribute at the top. That matches what I tell it to connect to. So you can have many different hubs on your server that do different things. In this case, our move shapes hub does the connectivity for moving shapes. And then I start to monitor for events. I monitor for shape moved or client count changed events. And I'm able to do updates accordingly. And I pass in two delegates into this function. That's how the UI gets updated if something moves or updates. But really, the server is the one telling us, so we know exactly what's happening. Once we start the connection is persistent unless your internet drops out. SignalR can do a detection if a client is lost. It's all web protocol, so it could be a little bit stale sometimes unless you add good logic. So it's not like SignalR magically knows a client disconnected unless the client tells it, hey, goodbye. If a connection is lost, the server does have to occasionally check if our clients still have connectivity, do a ping or something. So that code isn't in our sample, but you'd have to write it in the real world. But for the most part, doing commands back and forth is very simple. I mean, I think what I showed you was kind of cool, but it didn't require much code based on open standards. And the big advantage, again, is this portability with other technologies. This could be a Windows Phone app that's moving the shape as well. You don't have to build two different services to support it. And you don't have to just stick to WCF, let's say, as your only way of doing connectivity. You can do OData, you can do Web API, HTTP client, you can do SignalR. These are all capabilities to help bolster the bottom of your application layer, all the way from the server up to the client if that's where your logic lives. So that's all the server logic. Let's talk about .NET Framework. One thing that sometimes I think gets lost in the translation of Microsoft people talking and people listening, and I'm one of those people too, because Microsoft has a lot of people that talk. Sometimes I'm the one just doing the listening, and even I get confused. So I want to say this right away. .NET Framework is not just that thing that we ship when we ship a .NET Framework. .NET Framework, from our perspective, if you ask our developers, like our developer division, the folks that work on .NET, what is .NET to them? It's a combination of things. To them, Entity Framework is a part of .NET. To them, capabilities, some of the language capabilities are as well. But the big investments that they've made recently that have actually come out, they're real investments, they're out there today and available, are things like enhancements to Portable Class Library. So Portable Class Library came out with .NET 4.5, but since then we've shipped updates to it, and updates at the .NET level. We've made it so that this PCL library doesn't stay stale, that it continues to evolve. We've made sure Windows Store, Windows Phone support continues to grow. We've added HTTP client, async capabilities into it. We've taken it well beyond where it was on the day that it was released. Entity Framework, like I said, is part of .NET as well. It's our data connectivity layer. It's built right into the heart of .NET, and it allows you to do connectivity from WPF app straight to a database if that's what you need to do. Like let's say local database cache, right? Let's say your WPF app talks to a server out there in the cloud to get its data, do its communication, but then on the local server, maybe it has a local cache database, a SQL compact or something. You can use Entity Framework for that. And also, we continue to evolve. So right now, they're working on something called immutable collections, which will add immutable collections to .NET 4.5 or Windows Store applications. And this capability just didn't exist when .NET 4.5 came out, right? So they're releasing these packages. They're releasing them through NuGet. You install them, and all of a sudden, your API becomes richer, becomes bigger. And I'm not, an expert on immutable collections, but I can tell you that apparently the idea of a collection that can never be changed, sort of guaranteed, is a big thing. I've never written applications, I guess, complex enough to need it, but I know lots of folks are excited that we continue to look at the community and say, what is the community looking from us? They want better data access, they want immutable collections, they want portability of code, and we continue to invest in those areas even after the framework ships. And more things at Microsoft are becoming available through NuGet, through out-of-bound releases where we're not waiting for a big stage event like TechEd to give you some capabilities. And this is just another one of them. So I want to show you some of those capabilities. I want to show you portable class library and the 2 extensions for NuGet that have been given to it for async capability and HTTP client. And we'll take a look real quick at Entity Framework. Well, I'll show you one thing here. There's a really good blog that was updated even as recently as 7 days ago. It's the base class library, the BCL blog. I'm going to put a link into the episode here once it's on Channel 9 and make sure you guys have access to it. But take a look at that blog. You'll see a lot of the details around what the base class library team is shipping through NuGet out of bound for .NET to keep its capabilities growing. And then things like Entity Framework are bigger teams sort of designed for that specific feature. So they ship on different blogs in different places, but everything goes through NuGet, which is kind of nice. So recently they've shipped the RTM version of HTTP client for portable library. Async has reached stable state. Immutable clients have been updated and released as a preview. So a bunch of investments happening right now, shipping right now as well. The idea behind portable class library is that you can have one code base and it can be reused in different kinds of applications. So you can write .NET. You can write .NET that does basic logic, I don't know, convert a string to an int or something. You can also do more complex things. You can do an async call out to the server, get data, convert the data from JSON to an entity, and return that entity to your client app. That could be written once. That could be shipped once in one library. You can add that reference to Windows Phone object, Windows Phone project, a Windows Store project, a WinForm, a WPF, everything that it supports, the PCL supports. Write it once and use it everywhere. So that's kind of the capability that I think really will bring value to developers as they're asked to do more and more, right? A lot of us are asked, oh, can you write this and that at the same time? Well, that's a lot of this and that, potentially. And if you're maintaining a WPF app and you have logic to connect to a server, you might not want to rebuild it every time you want to build a Windows Phone app that talks to the same endpoint. So let's take a look at what PCL looks like. I've created a simple example here. On the server, I've created a web API, an MVC project. On the client, I have a desktop WPF application. I have a Windows Store and Windows Phone. These are all the actual shipping projects for all those categories. And this one common project, the PCL project, is referenced by all of them. When I hit build, all of them have access to this library. So that's a very powerful capability. And in the library, I've built one entity class, which is just a bunch of properties for Twitter. So I've used this website called JSON to C# to convert a JSON feed into classes. And they're nested classes, so there's a root object, I believe they call it, a root object. And the root object contains entities, zoom in a little bit, contains things like entities and user objects. So this file was auto-generated from JSON, from a JSON feed for me. And then I have code for, let's start here, for going out to Twitter and up to a certain number of max items, I get the Twitter feed, I convert it to a collection of these root objects, and it's populated all the way down. And then I go ahead and display the tweets out there. I just want to show you what that looks like when I run the WPF app. Selfish plug, that's another session I'm repeating today because it was popular. And that's the actual feed that's out there on Twitter. So that's what Visual Studio has been twittering as of a couple of minutes ago even. So I wrote this code once. Let's take a look at what the code looks like. Put some breakpoints again. So my client on startup right away just wants to get a maximum of 6 items. I go ahead and right away call Twitter feed. Twitter feed lives in that common library. So this is, again, something I can reuse in all those applications. It goes out to the internet. It creates an HTTP client inside a portable class library. It uses a base address that I provided, which is api.twitter.com. I then give it a REST action. So I tell it, again, Zoom doesn't work very well. This should be better. So I tell it to go out there to the status timeline and go look at Visual Studio and get me a bunch of results. And then I filter them down to the amount that I want to return to the client. Of course, ideally, I would actually update the number, but that's fine. It's just a sample. But I just want to show you kind of how much power this has. So then I go ahead out there, go to the internet using the async pattern, right? So my client is not affected. It's still responsive. Whether that's a Windows Phone, Windows Store, or WPF client, it doesn't matter. So everything stays responsive. I go out there. I convert the JSON. I will be converting this JSON query that came back. That came back from the server, from Twitter. And I'm going to go ahead and still within PCL. The cool thing is that I am still in the PCL library, right? I have not left PCL at all. Now I'm going to take it and serialize it. So serialization is also quite supported in here. So even though I start with this JSON payload, I'm going to convert it to the type of root object and all its nested ones, convert it from the stream, and by the time it returns the data, it returns me 43 entries that I'm going to filter down to 6. But each entry is quite populated. Everything from when it was posted to who posted it. This is all being done from my PCL library. This was not possible when we shipped PCL. We didn't have async in there, so you just couldn't write async in the portable class library. We didn't have HTTP client. Now we do. That's the power of shipping things through NuGet out of bound. So that shows you guys how we can reuse code. None of these other projects have any code, so I'll admit to that right away. But they're real projects. This really is a Windows Store app. There really is a working reference, and the code does work. I can assure you. I've done it plenty of times. All right. For the last demo in this section, and then we'll get to user interface, I just want to show you guys Entity Framework. So this is very useful if you want to do Entity Framework on your client for whatever good reason. I'm not going to tell you when it is a good reason or isn't per se, but you could do this. And we've actually shipped something called the Entity Framework Power Tools. And those Power Tools, whenever you usually see them, they're showing web projects as an example of, hey, use these Power Tools to generate code first for your web project. But it works with WPF as well. It's really cross-compatible. So when I clicked on my WPF project, when I was building this sample, the Entity Framework reverse engineer code first allowed me to connect to my sample database and generate my code first objects and put my connection string in there for development purposes. It did all that for me. So if you get that extension, it will work for you as well. My application is nothing to write home about once again. I'll run it. We'll get to the pretty demos in a second. All this does is go ahead and return some data from a database, and there is no service involved. This is going from WPF straight to the database. The way it does it is quite simple from the amount of code you have to write. That plugin that I show you, that extension that we built, created this class for me, which maps it one-to-one to the database. It also created this data context, and it put a connection string based on this name right here, put a connection string into my app.config file. It did some configuration to basically say that we now have a list of employees that we could potentially return. And if I query this list, this DB set, it will go out to the database, it will generate the SQL, it will get the data for me. There's no step procedures to write, there's nothing. That's the point of Entity Framework. It's running just fine. This is the latest version, version 6. That's the beta, just came out a couple of days ago, I think, or within recent history. And if you look at, once again, the NuGet packages, we have Entity Framework installed on our WPF application just fine. So this NuGet package gives us the capability. The extension lets us generate the code. And there's almost nothing for you guys to do except you initialize the connection, and then you tell it you want to get all the employees out of the collection. At this point, it'll generate the SQL query, go out to the database, pull the data down, populate your entity, and you're done. That's all you have to do. And this is the exact same code you write on the server. So kind of back to skill sets, right? You don't need to reinvent yourself. We're all very busy. It's really hard to keep up. I struggle to build even some of these demos a little bit. You know, I've worked with every one of these technologies at some point in the last year and a half, and I was like, man, I don't remember everything. There's plenty of samples, plenty of documentation, and even if I found a sample that was talking about MVC, I adapted it to WPF very quickly, and I found that WPF samples do exist even for Microsoft, and I'm going to publish even more samples for you guys. I want to keep this story going after this session. I don't want it to be just one session, and you're going to see more and more of this, I hope, from Microsoft in the near future. That's our hope, at least, where we can show you how to take advantage of more technologies, not only across the ecosystem that we have, but also including WPF. It is an important part of our story. I can't stress that enough. I got asked twice, once at this conference and once from a buddy of mine in New York, if they should be using WPF to build X type of application. Now, I had to hear them out. I had to hear what they were trying to build, right? I might have suggested Windows Store. I might have suggested Windows Phone or Web. Web is often the answer. You know, Touch sometimes is the answer. Store if you're consumer apps or you're a business that wants to deploy to lots of folks, kind of through a store type mechanism within the company that you've seen in some of the keynotes. That's great. In some cases, it's a trading app with multi-monitors, and they also want to burn DVDs while they're at it. That's going to be a WPF app today. And your skill sets will carry with you all the way down to Entity Framework. All right, so that's our demo. Now for a couple of cooler demos. Let's talk about Windows 8. Windows 8 has a few kind of cool capabilities that we can take advantage of as WPF developers. But I'm going to prefix this and just put the cards where they are. And that is Windows 8, one of its big features is touch. Windows Store is the best experience for that. That's where you're going to get it. And the Windows APIs behind it, they're designed to kind of work together. That is the ecosystem that we've built out. Now, that's in the sense of taking advantage of what's new. Your WPF app that you've built 10 years ago should just run on Windows 8. In fact, I know customers that do that. They just run it on their Windows 8 slates today. It's not the best touch experience. It's better than Windows 7 was. But there are certain things you could do to make your app better, right? Polish it out. And I'm going to show you some things you can do from a code perspective, and I'm going to show you what some of our partners can do as well to help you if you're willing to make that investment. The first thing is toast notifications. If you don't want to read all this stuff, what a toast notification is, anybody use the newest Outlook? It does something like that. Top right? Ooh, you get a message. You can do that as well. That's a Windows 8 toast. That Windows 8 toast can be invoked from a server sending a notification to the client. If you guys have a subscription, that could be a Windows 8 app agent running in the background, triggering it, or WPF can trigger it. There's a couple of caveats. Your WPF app has to be a shortcut on your desktop, on your Windows 8 Metro desktop screen, the start screen, I guess. And your application has to have an app ID registered with Windows. That's like a Windows, something that started with Windows 7. So if those two things are true, you can show notifications. I'll show you how to write that as well. There's also a touch keyboard. This code is not final yet. I'm still working to finalize the sample. I'm working with the Windows team. But a lot of folks have asked me, and I've actually looked around the internet, there really has not been an answer how to do this. When you click on a text box, how do you show the touch keyboard? The one that comes with Windows 8, the black pretty one. And I'm investing time to help you guys figure that out. This works by default with a Windows Store application. So you click on any text box, the keyboard comes up. It's smart enough, and the framework is designed extremely well to shift the whole application upwards a little so the keyboard doesn't cover it. So Windows 8 will always give you that better experience. But let's say you've made 10 years of investment into WPF and you want this capability. And maybe you're willing to write some code that makes your text box get the heck out of the way of the keyboard coming up. Or you're willing to let the user kind of move it out of the way. I'm going to show you how to at least get a little bit to a better state than where you were. There's nothing like telling your users, oh, if you want to do touch input because this app works pretty well on the slate, you got to find that icon for the keyboard in the bottom right. That's just a nightmare. At least having it come up will be a huge advantage, I think. Also, the whole ability to really make it the best experience possible is through third-party ecosystem today. If you have a bunch of controls that need touch support, you don't want to write custom code, which is unfortunately the way you'd have to do it. Like our native controls, very few of them do the best job with touch. I think the scroll list has been updated and such, but really the third-party ecosystem has the richest support, so we'll go through those as well. The partners that I'm going to talk about later today include 3, not the only 3 that are out there, but just 3 that I was able to work with in time for this presentation. So Infragistics, Telerik, and DevExpress have been very kind to help me put a couple of demos up on stage today, things that they've already published out to you guys. I just made sure that I had them, I knew where they are, I had licenses and such. And these vendors offer dozens of controls. They support Visual Studio 2012, .NET 4.5. They give you a lot of value, even if touch isn't the value, but they also go beyond that. They give you a bunch of those controls that are touch optimized, and I'll show you how that works as well. So these are going to be our three demos. We're going to look at our partner ecosystem, and we'll close out with some custom code you can write to do toast notifications and invoking the touch keyboard. When I was building that deck, I was like, which partner do I put first? They're going to be mad at me if it's this one or that one. It was random, guys, so I didn't pick favorites, I promise. So here's some samples. We're going to start off with DevExpress. The computer that I'm using right here is the Lenovo X1 Carbon Touch. So it's a touch PC. I really could touch it. And I'm going to click around the application DevExpress made as a sample. So I'm going to go into, click on the tile that they've created. It's a realtor application, right? We're going for a bunch of houses. I'm using touch to scroll up and down. This is working very smoothly. I'm able to click on a particular house, take a look at it. There's a bunch of tabs in the top right. The links work well with touch. I can click on the link. The application shifts. It looks pretty. So the vendors will give you controls which are optimized. They have a lot of controls, and you'll find not all of them work 100% well with touch. I'm sure they'll work with you if you report, like, you really need something to work better with touch. These guys tend to be very good. But again, the basics work, right? You can scroll around. You can click on things. I don't know these apps 100%, so I don't always know what's scrollable or not, but I know these screens. I've taken a look at them. There's tooltips when you put your finger. So that's where my finger is, that box. That's where I'm clicking to see some more information, so very nice. Here's the last one, like statistics. I thought this was cool. Yay, turn. Everybody loves something that spins. Guys, I'm sorry, I know how tired you all are. The fact that you're here, even some of you are sitting there with your eyes closed, I forgive you. Just listen to me, thank you so much. All right, let's take a look at another demo here. We looked at DevExpress, next one's going to be Infragistics. And I'm going to look at their map browser. Every vendor gave me a bunch of demos. I just don't have time, to show you every one of them. But I will show you some cool ones. Let's take a look at US airline traffic. I thought that was awesome. So I'm using pinch in zoom, so I'm zooming into this map. This is a map control that you can put into your application. And they support all sorts of visualization, animation. There's a bunch of airplanes. I have no clue. Is this real data? Yeah, that's real airplanes? Oh, that's cool. Real old data. Real old data. I love it. It's perfect. Earthquakes. All right, so the folks at Infragistics say that I'm connected to the internet. I hope so. Otherwise, I think this demo would blow up and I would look pretty stupid. So there's some earthquake data. You can kind of see the potentials here, right? The big thing about touch, though, when you're optimizing your application, let's say you're like a lot of our customers, you have no money to spend, right? Or you have money to spend only once a year, and that part of the year is not here yet, and you just want to make your app a little bit better. Take a look at the guidelines of Windows Store applications for how to build the user interface. Spacing between buttons, button sizes. The ribbon no longer has a restriction on licensing, so you can modify even ribbon controls to make the buttons bigger. Do whatever you have to make your app touch-friendly. At the end of the day, touch is maybe like two big things. It's making sure the finger doesn't click on something wrong, and gravity. People expect that gravity effect. They want to scroll something. They want to spin something, right? They want to slide something. They want to do those gestures that invoke a little bit of mathematics behind the scenes. And trust me, all these vendors and us on Windows 8, Windows Phone, we've invested a lot of time to make that gravity effect do what you expect it to do, bounce, when it hits the end of the list. It's little things that really light up applications. So you can do things today. You can invest with partners. And you can build Windows Store applications. So there's a lot of options to build really great touch experiences. And finally, we'll close out with Telerik. I'm just going to use their big sample. I forgot. They gave me a key, and I forgot to register my computer. It's like, oops. So here is touch enabling. So once you touch enable their application, even this is kind of a good demo. So their select there of demos, I thought it was actually a very good demo, where you can scroll through a very, very beautiful list of metro-like tiles, as Microsoft used to call it before we stopped. But our vendors still use that name. That's the only reason I said it. Lawyers, don't come after me. It's all our partners' fault. So the partners create these metro-like tiles, which allow you to do very easy clicks. That's super important. Such an important thing. So here I'm going to click on, let's see there was one, I know which one I wanted to show. There's an image editor. This allowed you to have, this is a very kind of basic demo, but it shows off what really is important. You got to have a big plus. You got to have a big minus. Your finger. Have you seen some people in this room? Their hands are probably much bigger than mine. Look around you. Can you imagine them trying to touch this thing? They hit it all over the place. So you've got to have big touch surfaces. And you can do very basic interaction, rotational flips and such. The reason why that's cool is because you could do it with touch. The fact that your undo is very clearly clickable, so that's all very cool. And then they have this one. Spreadsheet. We notice how the spreadsheet looks right now in the touch mode, and they've enabled different kind of capabilities. So I believe, and Telerik can correct me if I'm wrong at some point, but their controls are using skins to do this. So the skin right now is touch, but if I click to use mouse and keyboard, it becomes a lot friendlier to mouse and keyboard. That's one of the paradoxes, right? If you optimize your application for touch, sometimes it'll be like too optimized, and people with mouse and keyboard will be like, why do I need this big-ass button? What am I, I'm not that blind, What is this giant thing? Well, your finger is bigger than a mouse. Mouse is quite a nifty thing. Here you click switch to touch, and the controls become very nice. So if you click into a cell, right, or if you move around with touch, click in here, and you can say this is going to be bold, this is going to be italic. It's beta, that's why, or maybe I'm not editing it, that's why it's probably not working, but you kind of get the idea. And they've customized the ribbon interface here. So the ribbon actually has larger buttons than what is normally available. That's partially because Microsoft used to have a restriction, and no longer does, around the licensing. At least last I checked. Please double check if you're going to make any changes to the ribbon, but I'm pretty sure I'm right here. Yep, somebody just said I'm right. That somebody better be right. And that's a demo. So we've seen, maps. We've seen pretty things twirl. I should bring that back up on the screen. We've seen all sorts of cool capabilities from our partners. And I want to point out that our partners are here. So if you have some time between sessions before the last day is over, stop by the booths. I don't necessarily think you'll walk out of here remembering booth number, but I put it up there anyway. They have websites which do a great job at describing their controls, and they're very responsive people. I love our partners. I've been working with partners for a very long time. Every project I've ever done in XAML land, whether it's personal, I've used my own money to buy their controls, whether that's customer-driven, I've helped customers select the right controls for their solutions. I've worked with every one of these guys. They're great. We have lots of other partners as well. Please do take a look at them. And I want to end this on WPF best practices. We're going to spend about an hour on MVVM right now, so I'm going to explain MVVM from scratch. well, no, I'm kidding. But I do want to say that there are best practices, and we don't have time today. And you probably can find a million people telling you all about MVVM and testing and doing XAML data binding and not like old control name dot something items dot add, or use XAML data binding, test your applications, use the right patterns, lots of stuff out there for you. Combine it with the right service layer, the right optimization, you can do quite a bit. And of course, I forgot 2 small demos, so I'll show them before we end. I still have 5 minutes. So let's show you 2 cool demos, and we can close out. People are probably like, oh, yes, we can leave. And like, oh, he has 2 more demos. That's actually a good trick. Demos will keep people in their seats. I should do that every time. I'm not going to bore you too much, but I will show you this. That it's real code. I don't want you to think, oh, this isn't real. Yep, thank you. My colleague Caesar said change, and he was very right. I'm going to run this application, and I'm going to show you 2 things. First of all, I'm going to invoke the notification by clicking this button. There it is. And by clicking on the notification, my app's going to know about it. So the same way that Outlook gives you that annoying, you have a new email, who wants another email, right? A dialog, you can use this in your application. You can use it with code that we provide as a sample. You have to have a reference to API Code Pack. This is a free pack from Microsoft that it enables some integration with Windows. And then we have a sample that shows you, first of all, how to create a shortcut, because a shortcut is required in order for notifications to work. It's a Windows 8 security restriction. We don't want things that are not even on your Metro start screen to be giving you notifications that you click on and then the app does something malicious. That could happen, right? At least if it's on your start screen, you know that you installed it, or at least we hope you did. Then we have, because this is not a Windows 8 app, like a Windows Store app, we have some COM APIs we need to call to make this happen. And don't worry about it. We have the exact sample. You'll paste this once, and you won't look at it again. So it's not like you have to get terrified by, COM interrupt. That's all in the public sample, and my sample will have it as well, duplicated. And then inside of the application, we use the Toast Notification Manager to create an XML template. We tell the template what image we want to use. So let me show you this again. I'll show you the notification. Let me see if I can zoom in before it goes away. That almost worked. Let's try it again. Okay. So this Toast notification has an image, has some text, and shows you the, it went away, but shows you the icon of your application. So you can customize the left icon, the big one, the text, and then whatever your application's icon is, that's the icon that's going to show on the bottom right. And you do it all through this XML template. And then you have some events so that you know that something was activated, dismissed, or failed. So let's say you're trying to show Toast and they're failing, and then you need to do something else in your app to notify the user that something changed. So Toast failed, so you might want to unfocus, I don't know, give them a message box, hey, you've missed something critical. So you can do that using these events that are just .NET code. And for the last demo, I'll show you guys the touch keyboard, something I'm working on. This is using the Windows SDK that comes with Windows 8 that's on your machine. And I have to do a couple of things. I have to disable inking. This is a sample that's actually on MSDN. I cut and paste it, so I'm not going to even show it to you guys. But if your WPF app relies on inking, you can't do the touch keyboard. That's just one of the limitations that we have with WPF. Nothing I can do about that, but most people don't rely on inking. So if you can turn off inking in your application, it is literally this much code. You say, hey, okay, I've turned inking off, and when the app loads, through automation, create a link, and then enable focus tracking. If you do that, this magic will happen. Here's my sample app. This is a gigantic text box. This is my finger hitting the screen as the keyboard coming up. That's my finger hitting the button in the app. It's going away. Some restrictions do apply. If I bring up the keyboard and I click somewhere there is no button, it's not going to do it for me. If I had text under the keyboard, it doesn't automatically know to shift my WPF app up. You could potentially write that logic if you wanted to. And you can, of course, teach your user to dismiss much easier than you can teach them to find this icon in the bottom right here. Another restriction is that the touch keyboard relies on a Windows service that's actually running on Windows. If that service crashes, which happened to me one time because I was running an unstable build of Windows, then my demo to my boss epically failed of, I got touch working with the text box and it's not working. So make sure that service is running. It will be most of the time. And that will do it. And again, these samples will be all available. Touch will be the one that's available the latest. Couldn't show you everything today. Just to point out, Connect applications are actually built with WPF. So if your boss gets excited or you get excited and you want to build a Connect app, or if you look at the demos we did, we had a session on Connect. Dan Fernandez did a session. You'll see they're using WPF. Lots of cool stuff, patterns and practices, more partners, lots of stuff you get through open source community, lots of things to show. You can find me today. I'm going to be 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Visual Studio booth on the floor. If you have any questions, email me, Twitter me, find me at the booth, not a problem. And there's a bunch of cool related sessions. My colleague Caesar here did one on .NET. Which one was that? Which one of these? Yeah, there you go, the first one, B204. We have one on Connect. We have one around using cross-platform development and modernizing using solution vendors. These are all sessions somehow related to WPF, so do check them out. We also have a bunch of hands-on labs. If today you have some time, portable class library, async in 4.5, or what's new in 4.5. If you're like, man, I do need a refresh on one of these, go take a look at one of these hands-on labs. And lots of resources. But really, I want to thank you guys again for coming out this early in the morning. I hope this was worth your time. Please let me know. Please write the survey out. We really appreciate your feedback, and thank you for your time. Thank you.